The biggest problem with the Vietnam War is that people feel a lot about the war, but don't fully understand it. The Western public is tunnel-visioned into only the American view of the war. This video, Why Being a Tanker in Vietnam Was Pure Hell by the channel Unbelievable True Stories with more than 200,000 views, is yet another prime example of this. The very first sentence sums up the entire issue exactly.
There is a common misconception that tanks were not used much in the Vietnam War due to the dense jungles and narrow city streets.
The irony is that even the creators of this video don't even know how little they know. They fall into the tunnel vision themselves. Even though they are trying to give more insight into tank warfare in Vietnam, they don't even come close to giving the full picture. The tunnel vision of the war comes from the American withdrawal. As they were pulling out of South Vietnam from 1969 to 1973, American forces started to severely limit their combat operations. It created a blind spot. As a result, the majority of American soldiers only experienced and remember the guerrilla war. It was within this blind spot, from 1971 to 1973, where North Vietnam completely changed the war. While American soldiers were leaving, most had no idea that the guerrilla warfare they fought was quickly being replaced with full-scale, combined arms, conventional warfare. In this blind spot, the People's Army of Vietnam transformed itself into a modern combined arms force. The communist world equipped the North Vietnamese with T-54-55 Type 59 main battle tanks, 122 and 130mm state-of-the-art howitzers, AT-3 Sager guided anti-tank, and SA-7 Strela guided anti-aircraft missiles. To support these new systems, 2,000 new trucks and 10,000 tons of oil and gasoline were delivered as well. The communist world stood behind the North. By the end of 1971, 20 battalions of tanks and heavy equipment, the 320A Infantry Division, and other independent regiments and battalions were sent south. While South Vietnam was slowly being abandoned and its support dried up, the communist world stood behind the North. This was only the beginning of this new war, and the vast majority of American troops never had to fight it. To best break the tunnel vision, fundamental basic knowledge of all tanks used during the war needs to be known. The video actually has a section doing this starting at roughly 6.5 minutes.
The US relied heavily on the M48 Patton, a robust and versatile tank armed both by 30 and 50 caliber machine guns, in addition to its powerful 90mm cannon. M113 armored personnel carriers were widely used, though their light armor made them extremely vulnerable to RPGs and mines. The M67 Zippo flamethrower tank. This was a modified M48 Patton designed specifically for close-range engagements, and instead of a cannon, it had a flamethrower. Then there was the M50 Ontos, a small, unconventional vehicle carrying 6 106mm recoilless rifles that fired high-explosive rounds. Another noteworthy tank was the M551 Sheridan, a light, air-transportable tank designed for mobility and equipped with a 152mm gun.
While the brief summaries seem informative enough, the video misses two of the most common Allied tanks of the war, the M41 Walker Bulldog and M24 Chaffee. This is probably, again, due to the bias to the American view of the war. Both of these models were not used by American forces, but rather given to South Vietnamese forces due to their simpler design and lighter weight. However, even if 350 M41s were given to ARVN units, making it one of the most common models seen in the war, it is never mentioned in the list. Ironically enough, footage of M41s is used throughout the video. The evidence of South Vietnamese tanks and tankers stares them right in the face, but they seem to have missed this perspective entirely. For the communist tanks, the video goes over the T-34, T-54, PT-76, and Type 59. Although weirdly enough, they say this.
The PT-76, although only designed to withstand machine gun fire, had excellent amphibious capabilities that allowed the NVA to surprise the US forces by crossing rivers and attacking from unexpected locations, making it a valuable asset in guerrilla warfare.
It is a bit odd to say, because the moment armor is involved, it is no longer guerrilla warfare, but rather conventional warfare. But again, the stereotype of the lightly armed Vietnamese communist guerrilla fighting the well-equipped American trooper is so strong that their use of armor doesn't even cancel that out. With the fundamental tank knowledge down, it makes it easier to find the remaining issues of the video. The first part of the video goes over Starlight, and how some American tanks were ambushed while making the fundamental mistake of not using infantry support.
Operation Starlight aimed to break up enemy forces gathering for an attack. However, the US Army made a critical error by deploying tanks and vehicles without infantry support. Although a tank is a powerful weapon, it relies on protective infantry to keep it from being overrun. Viet Cong infantry then swarmed the tanks, which were unable to use their weapons at such close range. Fortunately for the remaining tankers, expecting incoming reinforcements, the Viet Cong retreated back into the jungle, and the wounded and surviving crew members were rescued the following day.
It's an interesting section, but quite anecdotal and specific. The next section goes over some other vague, rather specific anecdotes about tankers using shotguns in close quarters, and how tankers worked in the intense heat, which sucked.
Gunners would often sit behind the turret armed with a shotgun or grenade launcher to guard the tank, and the commander could fire the main cannon from his position if needed. Inside the tanks, temperatures could reach a sweltering 130 degrees Fahrenheit, leaving tankers drenched in sweat. Among combat troops in Vietnam, tankers were said to be the worst smelling.
The remaining part of this section goes over some primitive early war traps of ditches and bamboo mines.
Besides ambushes, there were many traps specifically designed for tanks. Snipers would target commanders and drivers who had their heads peering through open hatches, which led to a strict close hatch policy, though this greatly reduced the tank crew's already limited visibility and situational awareness. Viet Cong soldiers would dig large holes in the narrow roads and cover them with branches, so that when a tank fell in, it could even flip over, making it almost impossible to recover.
For many American tankers, they didn't fight the intensive armored warfare of the late war, so the video has to grasp at straws for examples of tanker life and suffering. The biggest example of the limit to the American perspective of the war is this promise by the video.
This video will take you through the tanks used by both sides, tell stories of intense battles and challenges, and end with the terrifying tank battle between US and Soviet-made armor.
Let's look at their promise. It plays from the 9-minute mark to the end of the video.
Now, perhaps the most intense tank battle of the war. In March 1969, a tank platoon of M48 Patton tanks was stationed at Ben Het. Then, an anti-tank mine exploded just southwest of the camp, lighting up the area and revealing a North Vietnamese PT-76 tank that had triggered it. The blast illuminated 3 more PT-76 tanks and a BTR-50 armored personnel carrier. By this time, the US tanks had fired all their heat rounds and switched to high explosive shells, continuing to fire as the North Vietnamese began to withdraw. An AC-47 Spooky gunship arrived, harassing the retreating forces and helping bring this rare but intense tank battle to the end.
The American perspective bias clearly shows itself here. They only know about the single American tank duel of the war at Ben Het, 1969, and never even discussed the far larger, far more impressive tank duels that happened just 3 years later. In 1972, the North launched its Nguyen Huệ offensive, a 3-pronged, fully combined arms offensive intent on destroying the Republic of Vietnam. In the Battle of Quang Tri in I Corps, 3 full infantry divisions, accompanied by a tank regiment and other supporting forces, smashed into the outer defensive ring. The Pavan armor attacked straight down Highway 1. There was only one place where Highway 1 crossed the Mui Yang River, and that was the bridge at Đông Hà. It must be defended at all costs or be destroyed. The 20th Tanks, with South Vietnam's first 44 M48s, were given the mission. On the afternoon of April 1st, the 20th Tanks arrived at the bridge alongside the 3rd Marine Battalion. 1st Troop was deployed to the southwest of Đông Hà on a hill, while the 2nd and 3rd were directly positioned to block the bridge. Throughout the morning of the 2nd, naval gunfire and Vietnam Air Force A-1s took out tanks far in the distance. But at noon, a large tank column was spotted on Highway 1, heading straight towards the bridge. It was 2.5 to 3 kilometers away, extreme range for M48s. First Troop opened fire. 9 PT-76s and 2 T-54s were instantly destroyed. Listening in to North Vietnamese radio communications, the PAVN unit commander was stunned, stating that he had no idea where the fire was coming from. The unit had to scramble back north, all while under heavy fire from 20th Tank. The senior advisor, Colonel Batriol, was thoroughly impressed, stating that the gunnery was probably better than all but the very finest of US tank units could accomplish. Blocked from the north, PAVN forces redirected their attack into the west, rerouting their tanks to the Cam Loc Bridge. On April 9th, the 20th Tanks engaged additional T-54s, this time traveling down Highway 9 in an attempt to hit Đông Hà from the southwest. They opened fire again from a range of 2.8 kilometers, destroying numerous T-54s. The T-54s attempted to return fire, but their shots fell short. After losing 8 out of 10 tanks, the PAVN unit was forced to withdraw. The first main battle tank duel of the Vietnam War ended in total victory for the South Vietnamese 20th Tank Squadron. Đông Hà would hold for now. This is the actual most intense tank battle of the war, involving several tank squads and columns of main battle tanks from both sides at long range, not of just 4 American MBTs and some PT-76 light tanks. The full details of this battle can be found in this video on the channel. But that's not all. In the second prong of the offensive, in Tu Corps, there was yet another tank duel happening just weeks later. On April 24th, the 22nd ARVN Infantry Division headquarters and its defending 42nd Regiment have been crushed by a T-54 assault from all sides at Tân Canh. Nearby, at Dắk Tô II, the 47th ARVN Regiment and 9th Airborne Battalion did not have any time at all to react to the loss of the 42nd and division leadership. While Tân Canh was under full assault, artillery fire intensified on Dắk Tô. 4 tanks of the PAVN 7th Tank Company immediately drove over to Dắk Tô II to support the assault there. 2 T-54s drove right onto the airfield, one to the west to block reinforcements coming from Ben Het. The other rolled onto the center of the runway. It then proceeded to destroy all of the 47th Regiment's bunkers one by one. 2 M41s that had survived tried to take the initiative and drove into a flanking position to try to take out the center T-54 from the side. They fired 3 shells each at the T-54, but none of these shots could penetrate the armor. The North Vietnamese T-54 immediately turned around and destroyed the 2 tanks, one after the other. A Cobra gunship also flew in to try to destroy the tanks with its rockets, but they were ineffective. Seeing this in front of them was completely devastating to South Vietnamese morale. It seemed that nothing could faze the T-54s at all. The 12 M41s at Ben Het drove out to try and reinforce Dắk Tô II. However, 1 kilometer down the road, they were ambushed by a North Vietnamese blocking force equipped with recoilless rifles, RPGs, and Saggers. 9 of the tanks were immediately destroyed, and the remaining 3 were forced to retreat back to Ben Het. By now, the 47th Regiment had also shattered. Dắk Tô II combat base had fallen as well. The 23rd Division was desperately flown in to plug the gap made by the destruction of the 22nd. The full details of the duel are on this video on the channel. Even in the third and last prong of the offensive, at the Battle of An Loc, there were days of continuous and unrelenting tank assaults on the 5th ARVN Division defending the city. While there were no tank duels, South Vietnamese soldiers chased down and destroyed T-54s with not much more than M72 Laws in their arms. Up until now, untested weapons. Full tank columns and assaults were destroyed by both precision airstrikes and boots on the ground. Even the thumbnail of the video is one of these tanks, with a South Vietnamese soldier standing on top of it. The full Battle of An Loc can be found in this playlist on the channel. Within just the Easter offensive alone, there were several tank duels that surpassed Ben Het in terms of intensity and desperation. It has some of the most intense armored warfare never seen before in the conflict. Yet because of the tunnel vision, criminally few people know about it, even if this information had been publicly available for decades. Was being a tanker in Vietnam pure hell? The video makes a case for American tanker life being dreadful, with the heat, poor odor, and some random ambushes here and there. Its audience feels how much being an American tanker sucked, but don't know the whole timeline of the war, and therefore fundamentally cannot answer this question. The irony is, throughout the video, there are many examples of this transformed war, but the truth never clicks. So many images of destroyed or captured North Vietnamese tanks by South Vietnamese soldiers are shown throughout the video. Glimpses of the truth, that the end of the war was conventional and not the guerrilla war that so many American soldiers know. But because so many people, even journalists at the time, don't even know which tanks belong to which country, they simply assume all tanks are American. Because of this, the only tanker experiences discussed in the video are American. The video missed the conventional full-scale armored combat that ended the war. Tanks being destroyed by state-of-the-art guided anti-tank missiles, the AT-3 Sager and TOW missiles, tanks knocking each other out in armored duels, dedicated anti-tank infantry chasing down armor with RPGs on one side and laws from the other, as opposed to ditches and bamboo mines. To be a South or North Vietnamese tanker in the last part of the war, the conventional Vietnam War was pure hell. Too bad we didn't learn about any of it from this video.